Hey guys, in this video I'll be ranking the most controversial Mr. Olympia results of all time using a tier list format. These are the years where the outcome raised eyebrows, the crowd reactions were heated, and the ones that have been debated about ever since. While I think I've picked most of, if not all, the controversial Mr. Olympias, please let me know down below if I missed any in the comments down below. For the rankings, they are going to be based on a combination of factors: how good or bad the winner actually was compared to the rest of the lineup, whether the result felt like a clear robbery or just a close call, how much backlash there was from fans and media, and whether there were any behind-the-scenes politics that may have influenced the outcome. To break down the tiers, S tier is reserved for the most infamous decisions in Olympia history, the ones that are still talked about as some of the biggest robberies the sport has ever seen. A tier includes highly debatable outcomes that had major backlash, but at least some justification. B tier is for close calls that were controversial, but not outrageous. C tier covers minor or short-lived debates that mostly faded over time, and D tier is for results that were only slightly controversial or maybe overblown in the moment. Now, before we do dive into it, I want to give a quick shout out to my partner, Old School Labs. If you guys are interested in high quality supplements, you can use my code JakeUltimate or check out the link in the description below. With that all being said, if you guys do enjoy these videos, a like and sub would be awesome. And without any further ado, let's get into this video. Let's start things off with one of the strangest Olympias in history, 1971, the year Arnold Schwarzenegger won without facing a single opponent. And no, that's not an exaggeration. This was the year the IFBB decided to disqualify several top contenders, most notably Sergio Oliva, Franco Columbo, and Roy Callender, for having competed in unsanctioned non-IFBB events earlier in the season. What was supposed to be a stacked and highly competitive lineup turned into a one-man show. Arnold walked on stage alone, hit a few poses for the crowd, and walked off with the Sandow uncontested and unchallenged. Now, to be clear, he did look pretty good. This was peak early 70s Arnold, and there is a good chance he would have won even if the full lineup had competed. But that's not really the real issue here. The controversy lies in how the IFBB enforced its rules, seemingly targeting athletes like Sergio and using technicalities to protect its golden competitor. Fans and competitors alike were frustrated, not necessarily because Arnold had won, but because the sport was starting to show signs of deep political favoritism and selective enforcement. It robbed the fans of what could have been a legendary battle between Arnold and Sergio, and it damaged the credibility of the Olympia as a true competition. So, while this was not a judging scandal in the traditional sense, as there was no bad call or questionable comparison, the way the Federation handled the event left a bad taste in people's mouths. It was controversial, no doubt, but more in terms of politics and missed potential, rather than a blatant robbery. For that reason, I would put 1971 in B tier, a frustrating and heavily politicized year, but not one of the all-time judging disasters. Moving on to 1972, we go from a no-show contest to one of the most debated decisions in bodybuilding history. This was the rematch the world had been waiting for: Arnold Schwarzenegger versus Sergio Oliva. Both men were legends, both were in great shape, and both came to win. That said, what went down in Essen, Germany is still shrouded in controversy till this day, as Sergio came in looking massive and streamlined, cutting down from 270 in the offseason to around 240 on stage, and he had the size, the shape, and arguably a better flow, and a lot of people even back then thought he had done enough to beat Arnold. But there was strange things happening behind the scenes. According to Sergio, as soon as he and Arnold were called to the lineup, the judges rearranged them in alphabetical order, which conveniently placed Arnold in front and Sergio behind him, blocking his visibility to the crowd and the judges. Sergio's fellow competitor Serge Nubret even told him that they have cheated you. And maybe even the most shocking part is that even Arnold himself reportedly told Sergio, "I don't deserve to win this." That is how skewed the situation felt. It even gets messier, as Sergio later revealed that he had been banned by the IFBB even without being notified. The whole event felt stacked against him, from the stage arrangement to the political overtones, and Arnold walked away with the win with his third Olympia title, but for many fans, Sergio was the rightful champion that night. This one is tough to judge as it was close in terms of the contest, but the mix of backstage politics, shady judging behavior, and Arnold's own admission to, not winning this one fairly makes this more than just a debatable call, it's a true controversy. And for that reason, I would have to put 1972 in A tier. Not quite the most blatant robbery ever, but absolutely one of the most suspicious and disappointing moments in bodybuilding history. Now we get to 1980, arguably the most talked about Mr. Olympia of all time, and yes, it is controversial. But hear me out, because this one might not be quite as black and white as you think. This was the year Arnold came in out of retirement 5 years after his supposed last Olympia win in 1975. No one expected him to return, to put it blatantly, not even the fans, not the competitors, and definitely not guys like Mike Mentzer, Chris Dickerson, or Frank Zane, who had been prepping all year for a totally different kind of battle. And then, out of nowhere, Arnold shows up and decides to jump back in. Now, the narrative has always been that Arnold was out of shape, undeserving, and handed the win because of his fame, and yes, there were definitely politics at play, but when you actually look at the physique he brought to the stage, it was solid. Sure, he might not have been at his all-time best, but he was only slightly off from his 1975 version, in my opinion. He still had that massive round chest, crazy biceps, broad shoulders, and a presence that none of the other guys could match. His legs were a little down in size, sure, but they were far from terrible compared to the lineup. The thing is, nobody else really brought it either. Mike Mentzer was impressive, dense, grainy, and dry, but he did have a bloated midsection and not the best shape ever. Chris Dickerson was aesthetic but lacked that wow factor. Frank Zane was recovering from an injury and it showed on his physique. Boyer Co. looked good too, but again, no one came in and blew the doors off. And when it came down to structure, stage presence, and upper body dominance, Arnold still had a serious edge over the rest of the competition. That said, the way he entered last minute, the rumors of favoritism, and the fact that several judges were connected to either Arnold or Weider definitely made this one feel shady. And the post-show reactions were also pretty intense. Guys like Mentzer and Frank Zane were furious, and even some of the crowd booed the decision. So yes, it was controversial, but not necessarily a robbery. Arnold looked better than people give him credit for, and the rest of the lineup didn't exactly crush it either. For all those reasons, 1980 would go into A tier, highly debated and politically charged, but not an outright injustice when you break down the physiques. If you guys thought 1980 was controversial, then 1981 took things to a whole nother level, because this one felt less like a comeback story and more like a straight-up favor from the Federation. This was the year Franco Columbo returned after a serious leg injury that he suffered years earlier in the World's Strongest Man competition, and while it was impressive that he even made it back to the Olympia stage at all, what was not impressive was the physique he brought with him, at least not compared to the rest of the lineup. Franco still had a thick upper body and solid density in the chest and back, but his legs were nowhere near Olympia caliber. You could clearly see that the injury had taken a toll on his lower body, and it was impossible not to notice the imbalance from upper to lower bodies. Meanwhile, competitors like Tom Platz and Danny Padilla were incredible when it comes to their shape. Platz had the best legs on the planet, and Padilla was arguably the most balanced and aesthetic guy in the entire show. Even Roy Callender brought a better overall package than Franco that night. The reaction to Franco's win was immediate and brutal. Boos echoed throughout the crowd, and many in the bodybuilding world were furious. Unlike 1980, where you could at least argue that Arnold looked better than expected, Franco simply did not deserve to win, period. It felt like the judges were paying him back for being Arnold's right-hand man, or for what he had done in the past, rather than judging what was right in front of them. The irony here is that Mike Mentzer didn't even show up this time, having retired in disgust after the previous year's results, and 1981 only added to the fuel that the idea of bodybuilding wasn't about who's the best, but who was connected. There was just no way around it. This one was a blatant misfire. So yeah, no question here, 1981 goes straight into the S tier. It was a full-on judging disaster, arguably the biggest credibility hit the Olympia has ever taken, and fans still point to it as one of the worst calls, if not the worst, in the sport's history. Alright, let's get into 1990, a year that's often remembered more for its confusion rather than any one competitor's physique. This was the infamous drug-tested Olympia, where the IFBB decided to implement strict IOC-style testing in an effort to clean up the sport's image. And while the intentions might have been good, the results were, well, underwhelming. With most of the competitors coming off or significantly reducing their cycles, the overall look of the show took a huge hit. Physiques were flatter, softer, and far less impressive compared to just 1 year prior. Still, Lee Haney, the champion, walked away with his seventh Sandow, and while he did not look like the monster he had been in years earlier, he was still the most structurally gifted guy on stage. His frame, muscle maturity, and width were enough to keep that title, even if he was clearly off by his own metrics. Guys like Lee Labrada or Shawn Ray came in sharper, more detailed, and arguably in better shape, but none of them had the size or presence to convincingly take him out. They looked good but smaller and less imposing, and in an era where mass was beginning to become more and more important, that made the difference. Add in the disqualifications from failed drug tests and the weird vibe surrounding the entire contest, and yeah, it was also controversial, but not necessarily unfair. The show felt deflated both literally and figuratively, but the right guy probably still won. So, while 1990 definitely had an awkward energy and plenty of frustration, it does not rise to the level of a true judging scandal. For that reason, I would put 1990 into the C tier, not a great look for the Olympia, but not a robbery either. Next up is the 1994 Olympia, a year where the reigning champ Dorian Yates found himself in one of the closest calls of his entire career. Coming off his legendary 1993 performance, expectations were sky high, but when he stepped out at prejudging, things looked a little off. His waist appeared bloated, his left bicep showed visible signs of a tear, and overall the look just lacked the crisp, dominant presence fans had come to expect from the Shadow. In contrast, Shawn Ray, who took second, looked arguably the best he ever had. Tight, aesthetic detailed from head to toe. His proportions, condition, and posing were on point, and many fans in the crowd and watching from home believed he might have stolen the show at prejudging. The judges definitely had a decision to make: go with the dominant reigning champ, who was a bit off, or reward the flawless, smaller competitor who nailed his peak. But here's the thing, Dorian came back strong at the night show. His conditioning sharpened up significantly, and while the torn bicep was still there, the rest of his physique just overpowered everyone else. His back, grainy condition, and sheer size were enough to remind people why he was the reigning champ, and while he did not quite hit the same as 1993 or what he would bring the following year, he was still very much Mr. Olympia level. The controversy mostly lies in that first round of prejudging, as Shawn Ray had a legitimate shot to win based on the initial comparison. But once the finals came around, Dorian reasserted himself and likely sealed the deal fair and square. So while this one was debated and could have gone, the other way, if the show ended after prejudging, it does not cross into the robbery territory. 1994 lands in B tier for me, a close call, a shaky start, but ultimately a deserving win for Dorian after he pulled it all together when it mattered the most. Alright, now on to 1997, and this one might ruffle some feathers as I probably won't be placing it where you think, and let me explain why. This was Dorian Yates' final Olympia win, and yes, he clearly was not at his best. His physique showed real signs of decline, a bloated midsection likely a result of growth hormone use, along with obvious bicep and tricep tears that disrupted the flow of his arms. His condition was also a step down from previous years, lacking the razor-sharp graininess that we had seen in years past. The big controversy came from Nasser Sonbaty, though, the second-place finisher who was widely considered the winner. Nasser looked complete, injury-free, huge, and well-balanced, and at first, many fans felt he should have taken the title. But this is where things get a little bit more nuanced. A lot of the photos from that show actually make the gap look closer than it actually was, and in some cases they make it look like Nasser should have won outright. But when you look at videos and see the full routines, comparisons, and transitions, the picture maybe shifts a little bit. From behind, Dorian still had a clear advantage. His back, hamstrings, glutes, and that dense, grainy quality were still on another level. Nasser, while impressive, lacked that hard, paper-thin skin condition, especially in the lower body. Dorian also posed strategically, using his experience to hide his weaknesses and highlight his strong points. His stage presence and confidence helped him minimize the impact of his injuries and push through the gaps in his physique. So, while it was a flawed version of Dorian and Nasser fans will always feel like he got snubbed, there's still a strong case that Dorian won on mandatory poses and the overall impact. The controversy is real, no doubt, but it was not a robbery in my opinion. 1997 would land an A tier because of that, being a highly debated decision that marked the end of an era, but one that still had some legitimate reasoning behind it. Now let's get into 2001, a year that's often thrown around as one of the most controversial in Olympia history, but I'm gonna say it wasn't quite a robbery. This was the start of the legendary Coleman versus Cutler rivalry, and Jay really brought it. He showed up shredded, dry, and very aesthetic, with incredible balance and condition, easily the best version of himself at that point, or even better. In fact, I think he even beat Ronnie in the prejudging, which had a lot of people thinking that we were going to witness a major upset. But when you look at the full picture, I still believe Ronnie Coleman deserved the win, even if the scoring leaned a little too much in his favor come finals. Yes, his waist was distended, and we later found out it was partly due to a medical scare that forced him to drink a massive amount of water before the show, but despite that, he still had an undeniable size advantage when it came to overall development, freak factor, and especially the back development. His sheer size, muscle maturity, and dominance in those signature poses were on another level. Here's the thing, Jay did have the prettier physique, he was more streamlined, had better lines, and was far more aesthetic, and I actually do prefer how he looked personally. But in the context of early 2000s bodybuilding, which was all about mass and shock value, Ronnie still fit the standard better. Jay just did not have enough size or freakiness to convincingly take him out, even if his look was more appealing. So, yes, it was a close call and definitely a bit suspicious in the scoring, but not a flat-out robbery. For that reason, 2001 would land in B tier, a very controversial and emotional moment in Olympia history, but one where the champ ultimately still did enough to hold on to his title. Next up is 2002, and this one was messy, no way around it. This was probably Ronnie Coleman's weakest Olympia showing during his dominant reign, as he came in noticeably smaller than usual, especially in the arms and legs, and just didn't have that same overwhelming freak factor that we'd seen from him in years prior. He still had solid density and good shots, especially from behind, but overall it was a much flatter and downsized version of the champ. Then there was Kevin Levrone, who placed second, and honestly, he did not look much better. He had some good moments, but his condition was off compared to what we'd seen from him in the past, and his legs were almost gone from every angle. It was one of those years where the top two just didn't feel like they deserved to be at the top, and that's where Gunter Schlierkamp comes in. He placed fifth, but many fans and even people in the industry believed he should have taken the entire show. He was big, conditioned, symmetrical, and brought a level of fullness and presence that neither Ronnie nor Kevin matched that night. Because of all this, the backlash was strong, Gunter's placing made no sense to a lot of people, and the idea that he finished behind guys who were clearly off stirred up real frustration. And the craziest part was that just a few weeks later, Gunter beat Ronnie head-to-head at the 2002 GNC Show of Strength. That result added more fuel to the fire, making fans question whether the Olympia was protecting its champion and sticking to politics over fairness. Now, Ronnie still had the edge in muscle maturity and some of the few key poses as well, and technically Gunter's placing at fifth means he wasn't really close in the judges' eyes. But when you factor in the visual comparisons and what happened afterward, it's hard not to feel like something was off with the scoring. So, while it's not quite a blatant robbery conventionally, the combination of Ronnie being off, Kevin not deserving second, and Gunter being wildly underplaced makes this one a very strong S-tier controversy. This was absolutely one of the most questionable Olympias of the 2000s, and I feel as though it gets downplayed because Gunter placed so low. Now let's move on to 2007, and this one is just about as close to a textbook robbery as it gets. Coming off his 2006 Olympia win, Jay Cutler was expected to hold on to the title, but when he stepped on stage in 2007, it was clear that something was off. He still had the mass, no doubt, but his conditioning was way below Olympia standards. His midsection was not as tight, his legs lacked the crisp separation he was known for, and overall he just did not have a Mr. Olympia look. On the other hand, Victor Martinez, who placed second, showed up at his all-time best. He was full, balanced, and far more conditioned than Jay, with better aesthetics as well, having a tighter midsection and a flowing physique that looked like it was tailor-made for the Sandow. He hit every single mandatory pose clearly and consistently, and when you compare them side by side, Victor was sharper in almost every area, especially from the front and side. Jay only really had the advantage in size, I guess, and that's it. And the reaction really said it all. You could hear the boos when Jay was announced the winner, you could feel the shock and frustration in the air, and even people who had supported Jay in the past were just stunned. This wasn't a case of a close call, this was a decision where most fans, analysts, and insiders agreed that Victor should have walked away with the title. It also reinforced that if you're Mr. Olympia, you almost have to lose the title twice to be dethroned, because clearly just being outperformed was not enough. Jay would go on to redeem himself in later years, and obviously lose the title in 2008, but in 2007, Victor was the better bodybuilder, no doubt about it. 2007 would firmly land in the S tier, a true robbery and one of the clearest examples of the wrong guy winning on a bodybuilding stage. Moving on, let's talk about 2014, one of the most intense and emotionally charged Olympias of the modern era. This was the absolute peak of Phil Heath versus Greene, and the energy on that stage was at another level. Between the posing battles, the physical bumping, and the tension in their body language, it felt like a true fight for the throne. Kai came in big, aggressive, and looking the best he ever had, full, dense, and with great muscle maturity. Some fans genuinely believed he had done enough to finally dethrone Phil. But when you break it down pose for pose, Phil Heath was still the more complete bodybuilder. His arms, shoulders, and back detail were on another level, and his balance was unmatched, and even though his waist was undeniably a bit bloated and off, Greene wasn't exactly immune to that either. He had his own bubble gut to deal with as well. While Kai may have, beaten Phil in a couple of poses, like the front lat spread or even front double, Phil won the majority of poses, and his muscle maturity and condition just looked more refined overall. The controversy here was probably due to the intensity of their rivalry and the drama on stage, rather than the actual scoring. Kai had the underdog momentum, the crowd's support, and brought one of his best physiques ever, but Phil's completeness still carried him through. So, while it was heavily hyped and definitely debated, it was not a robbery. The better bodybuilder still won, and for that reason, I would put 2014 into the C tier, more dramatic than controversial, with a result that still made sense when you looked at the physiques objectively. Next up is 2018, the year that finally ended Phil Heath's 7-year reign and crowned a brand new Mr. Olympia, Shawn Rhoden. And while a lot of fans celebrated the result, it definitely stirred up plenty of debate, even to this day. Phil was coming into this show off 7 straight Mr. Olympia wins, but heading into this show his midsection had become a real issue. He had undergone hernia surgery the year before, and the recovery clearly impacted his ability to keep his waist tight. His core control was inconsistent, and it threw off the flow of his physique, especially in the front shots. Meanwhile, Shawn Rhoden brought one of the most aesthetic, streamlined, and balanced physiques that we had seen in years. He nailed his condition, had an incredible silhouette, and looked picture-perfect from the front. He didn't overpower Phil with mass, but he hit his peak at the right time, and it showed in the comparisons. From the front and the side, you could argue that Shawn had the edge, but from the back, Phil still had more muscle, better density, and that trademark detail, especially in the back and general dense mass. Now, the real divide here came down to aesthetics versus overall development. Some felt Shawn's shape and conditioning should win here, and others believed that Phil still had more actual muscle development and won enough poses to retain the title. It was a close battle, and while it wasn't a robbery in my opinion, the scoring leaned into a new era where shape and flow were starting to be rewarded more than just freaky size and condition. So, while Shawn's win was well earned and marked a major shift in the sport, the result was definitely debatable, especially when you factor Phil's legacy and overall muscle maturity. For that reason, I would put 2018 into B tier, a controversial changing of the guard, but not an unjust one. And finally, we've got 2023, probably the most debated Olympia result in recent history. This was the year that Derek Lunsford took down the reigning champ Hadi Chupin in a decision that split the entire bodybuilding world right down the middle. A lot of fans, especially Hadis, saw it as a robbery, but let's break it down a little bit more clearly because I think this one was blown way out of proportion. Yes, Derek lacked that razor sharp definition in certain areas, particularly in the arms and chest, and Hadi was denser and more detailed in those poses, and arguably still had better muscle maturity overall, but Hadi also wasn't at his 2022 level. His conditioning, while good, wasn't quite as dry or crisp from behind, and structurally, he didn't flow as well as Derek from the front, just to put it blatantly. And the big difference here was that Derek's back was on another planet. With density detail, it was the best on stage by far. He was also more competitive than people give him credit for across all the mandatories. This wasn't a case where he got dominated and still won. He hung in there in every single shot. And let's not forget, Derek made huge improvements from 2022 to 2023, especially in size and fullness, and it definitely showed. He looked like a legit Mr. Olympia contender, and the real issue here wasn't the judging, it was the overreaction, especially from Hadi fans. There were personal attacks, threats, and a lot of venom directed at Derek, who literally just showed up, did his job, and got judged by the panel. The kind of reaction here has no place in the sport, and debate the result all day, that's part of bodybuilding, but turning it into a personal vendetta is another story entirely. So, yes, it was close, yes, Hadi could have won, and really nobody would have been mad, but this was not a clear-cut robbery, it was a razor-thin call that favored a guy who brought a complete and massively improved physique. For that reason, I would put 2023 into A tier, one of the most heated decisions in recent memory, but not nearly as one-sided as some people made it out to be. Anyways, guys, that about does it for this video. Please let me know your thoughts down below if you agreed or disagreed with the rankings, or if there are any Olympias that I left out. With that all being said, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.